My cluster is at currently version 1.19.3, and the idea is to move it to version 1.19.6. So let's move inside my infrastructure as code file. I'm passing from version 1.19.3 to version 1.19.6. And by now, the only thing I need to do is simply to commit and push my change to get my new infrastructure redeploy again with the version of my cluster to 1.19.6. So for now, let's have a look at the build of the infrastructure and also the deployment. We see it's going. By the time the build and the release of my infrastructure will be finished, let's have a look at the current Kubernetes context I'm currently using. Right now, we see that we have a context to AKS expected dev 1193. It's my current Kubernetes cluster that I've been named with the version inside the name. So after the deployment, I will have another cluster, the right one with the version 1.19.6, and it will be named AKS expected dev 1196. So the idea here is to move away my current development website from the EKS 19.3 version to the new cluster that we've been created during this demo. At the end, the IP address will change on that domain to the new cluster. Now let's wait until the infrastructure foundation is completely released, and then the development infrastructure will be kicking right after that. Now the deployment is started to be released. We don't have yet the deployment of the new infrastructure, but let's wait in the deployment part of the resource group our current development release. It's all released from our ARM template, and now we have it. And you see that the new cluster is start being created. And now it show up. It's in creating, so let's wait a little bit. Sometimes it took 4 minutes to be fully created. Okay, now we have it. My cluster is currently fully deployed. I get the Kubernetes context outside my console, and I will simply apply it on my machine. And now I apply the new context for my new cluster. When I go back under the Kubernetes tab inside Docker, I see that I have my new cluster nominate to version 1.19.6 already applied and already set. This has been done. Right now, we are ready to deploy my website to the new AKS cluster version 1.19.6. At the end, the IP address will be changed to point out on the right public IP that has been created under my AKS cluster. Now my website is fully deployed under the new AKS cluster, nominated to the version 1.19.6. We can see that the DNS has been changed from the previous IP that was linked to my old Kubernetes cluster. Now it's linked to a new IP address linked to the new Kubernetes cluster. So now quickly have a look at the infrastructure foundation I am using in Azure to be able to deploy environment Kubernetes cluster and also different application inside Kubernetes cluster without having to worry about where I'm putting it. Infrastructure foundation, I deploy Azure Key Vault, where I put foundation secret regarding what's my foundation resource group name and the resource location. And then I deploy my Azure Container Registry, basically because I simply choose to use one container registry for uh, all my environment. So when I build one container, even from a develop branch, master branch, or release branch, I put it there. Uh, so once I deploy my Azure Container Registry, I kept my information about this container registry into my Infrastructure Foundation Azure Key Vault. As we see, I use the container registry name, registry username, and registry password because when I'm initiating a new AKS cluster, I need to make a trust between my new container registry to AKS cluster. And then I have my Azure storage account that I decide to use that as foundation because I kept application backup stored inside my Azure storage account. For some reason, as an example, if I have a database, I have a cron job that took backup and put it there. What is used for? It's when or if I have destroy my production or even development AKS cluster, and then I decide to redeploy everything. My pipeline took and restored the backup from that location. And as we see, the pipeline will refer to the backup storage account name secret, backup storage resource group secret, and also backup storage key 1 and 2 in order to be able to know where I have to take that backup from the right location for my Azure storage account. And then came the Azure DNS. And then I have my runtime environment infrastructure, which means is a development environment, production environment, and QA and so on. So for each channel, environment channel, I have isolated infrastructure resources. So here, for every environment, I have a key vault. So I kept for that key vault, I also put in place a resource group name and resource group location because when I release an application, I refer to that key vault too. And then I deploy an Azure Kubernetes services. So I keep my AKS cluster name inside that key vault in order to be able, by example, in dev, if I have version 1, AKS version 1.0, and then I decide to deploy a new cluster at version 1.2, so the AKS cluster name secret will be updated to version 1.2. That is the pivot that I'm using when I deploy an application to be able to say to the pipeline, okay, now don't use that the cluster that is set in that value, and then the application is automatically deployed at the right place. It's like having a blue-green deployment for my AKS cluster. And then for sure, by environment, I have a SQL server where I also keep the secret inside the environment key vault. So I have my Hello World application that I want to deploy somewhere, but I don't know. When I release my application, I have a mechanism that pulls the value from the key vault and then know where to deploy it. So by example, my Hello World application has a SQL Server database. Then I will look over the resource group name and location to know where I have to create my my database in Azure. And also I will have to look to which server name I need to deploy it. And then I will create a database Hello World inside the right SQL Server instance. And then came my application to be deployed in AKS. So I look inside my foundation because my container registry information is stored in my key vault around the infrastructure foundation. When I have it, I'm able to my Kubernetes cluster will be able to pull the new image, container image, from the right container registry, and then will be deployed because on the AKS cluster name, because I have it in my environment key vault. And for the DNS part, it's simply when I release my new application, I know which is my Kubernetes cluster. So my release is able to integrate Kubernetes to know the IP and then set it to create the domain, the DNS, the domain name inside the desired DNS and update the DNS value. If I example as in my example, I had a dev.expertosolution.com domain name that was pointing on an IP address inside my old EKS cluster. So when I deployed the application on the new server, from my release pipeline, I was able to extract the new IP address used by my ingress of my application and then put it in place to update my DNS name dev.expertosolution.com to the new IP address used by my new AKS cluster, which means for a certain amount of time, I will simply keep my old AKS cluster alive until there's not any more traffic on my old AKS cluster, and then I can kill it and just let live my new cluster. So that's it.